Right, well, thank you, everyone. If you'd like to get this talk is already on the university's repository, so the DOI will come up again. But for those of you who hasn't visited Cambridge, that's what it looks like on a nice day. Yeah, so there's the DOI. If you want to grab that, it'll be at the end as well. And if you email me, then my auto reply will also link through to that DOI. So I want to talk today a few things about what we've done in Cambridge about open access. Firstly, I'm going to discuss some of the policies that we have in place in the UK with regards to open access and what that has meant for us. The university's response to all those policies, the systems that we use and some of the upgrades that we've done, the impact that all of this has really had, and what the future really holds for us and some thoughts for where we go with this. So, policies. It's complicated, really. So one of the biggest policies is the HEFCE policy, the Higher Education Funding Council for England. There are also many other policies, Research Councils UK, the Wellcome Trust, Cancer Research UK. We also have, for the time being, European funding policies as well. The European Commission and the European Research Council, but then of course multiple other funders as well. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation comes to mind. So HEFCE run what's called the Research Excellence Framework, and that distributes funding to universities. It's a very similar process to what happens in Australia here with regards to the ERA. It's a green open access policy. But they have different requirements. If you're in a STEM field, manuscripts need to be available within 12 months. That's accepted manuscripts. And 24 months for arts and humanities. The key requirement, and this is the thing that really drives a lot of the work that we do and a lot of the advocacy that we do around open access, specifically in Cambridge, is about getting accepted manuscripts into the repository within 3 months of acceptance. A lot of the time that means getting things into the repository before they've been published. And the big problem for the ref is that we don't know what papers will be used for the ref. We don't have knowledge or foresight. We have to therefore assume that any of the papers that the university publishes might conceivably be used for the ref, and therefore the goal is to make everything that the university publishes open access. So for us, it's a bit hard to judge what 100% of the university's publications are, but we think that that's about 10,000 manuscripts per year. That's journals and conference proceedings, about 10,000. Research Councils UK, they have a slightly hybrid policy. I shouldn't say hybrid in this field. They have a green open access policy, but they also have money for gold. They do have a kind of a preference for going gold, but wherever possible, we'll go for a green route if it's compliant with these rules. But again, they have different timelines and different dates. So their green policy is 6 months in STEM and 12 months in arts and humanities. They do require that things published gold are CC BY. That is an absolute requirement. And if they're funded by the MRC, the Medical Research Council, then there's an additional requirement for things to appear in Europe PubMed Central. Data policies also exist in the UK, and one of the constituent members of the Research Council's UK is the EPSRC. They're an engineering and science research council. Their data policy is reasonably strict, and it requires that all publications that acknowledge EPSRC funding should have a statement saying, if not where the data is, but or it's at least saying how to get access to the data if it's needed. And the data needs to be stored for 10 years or from at least 10 years from the last date of access. That potentially means that the data needs to be stored indefinitely. The Charities Open Access Fund is headed up by the Wellcome Trust, and the Wellcome Trust is the second largest private funder of research in the world, just behind Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. But they've teamed up with a number of charities, including the Cancer Research UK in the UK, to produce a kind of a unified charity open access policy. Their policy, they do allow green open access if it meets these requirements, but primarily they're a gold policy. They will pay for pretty much anything to go gold straight away. But the requirements they have for publishers is that things must be published CC BY, and the publisher must deposit the paper in Europe PMC. They also have sanctions for non-compliance. So if a researcher publishes something and they're funded by the Wellcome Trust, and then it's later found out when they do their end of grant return that the paper was not compliant, then the Wellcome Trust can withhold 10% of the grant, and they won't consider those papers in any future grant applications. So you won't be able to claim that this paper was useful when you go to renew your grant. So what does this all mean, and how does this all work? Well, for us, we start at the top and we get a manuscript, and we have to decide what to do with it. And then it gets really complicated. And that's only 3 policies. So we have multiple policies here, and just getting my head around this is really complicated. And by the way, this is just the decision-making process. There's an entirely different workflow, which is for actually depositing the manuscript into the repository. So there's lots of workflows and things that we need to think about here. The university's position is that we are committed to disseminating research, and that things should be sent to us for open access. The university doesn't really think that gold is necessarily the best way forward, especially hybrid publications. So wherever possible, and that's where the research councils comes in, we will try to make things green instead of gold. It's also a cost reduction exercise for us in many ways, because we get so many papers through that if we paid for everything, well, we wouldn't have any money for authors who may publish in a fully gold journal who actually need the money. Research councils and COAF both give us money, which we distribute on their behalf. The university itself doesn't have any institutional funding. So what's been the response, and what have we done? So in December 2014, which is when I joined the university, there were 3 of us. There were 2 open access research advisors and a repository manager, and that was it. Then in 2015, the Office of Scholarly Communication was formed, and that's headed up by Danny Kingsley, who some of you may well know. And what we try and do is we work in a transparent manner in everything that we do. But we also try to promote open access, promote open research, and just try and move the university forward towards open access. The message in terms of open access has been very simple. We just have basic information. We say, accept it for publication, upload your manuscript. And then we take care of the rest. So we don't want the burden to be on the researcher to know which policy they need to comply with, or whether this journal is compliant with their policy, or what to do when it's a review article, or whether it appears in, But the basic message that we've given to authors is that if you're accepted for publication, that you should upload it to us, and then we take care of the rest. So what has this meant? So we went a long time without many publications. And then the HEPI policy was announced, and we had an explosion. So now we've got almost 14,000 full-text manuscripts in the repository. A lot of them will be embargoed, but we've got them there. People can request them if they need them. Similarly with data. So the EPSRC policy was first announced, I think, in 2011. It first came out. But in 2015, the EPSRC actually started enforcing the policy. And it was at that time that we really got a huge uptick in the number of data sets that we hold in the repository too. I think we now have the most data sets of any repository in the UK. But there's a dark side. We've spent a lot of money. We've just passed over £7 million since we started, and that's just money that we distribute. Certainly within the university, there are other people that will be spending money as well to make their papers open access. And the average APC that we pay is about £2,000. And there's a lot of paperwork. You can imagine, 7 million divided by 2,000 equals a lot of invoices. The most expensive single article that we've ever paid for was £6,500. That was a combination of open access and some page and colour charges. And at the same time, we've seen really no reduction in subscription spend at all. And it means a lot of work for us, and an increasing amount of work. So we get about 2.5, we process on an average month, we now get over 1,000 tickets a month, 1,000 submissions a month. That's both manuscripts that are being submitted to us and also questions about open access, questions about data. And you can see where the university-wide emails go out. We get a good response from them, but it causes a lot of heartache in the office. And we're still getting over the last email that came out, and that was in April. So we're now in June, almost July, and we still haven't quite coped with all that. So I showed you before that we had about 3 staff members in 2014, and the staffing today is now a lot bigger. So we've now got about 7 or 6 people working on just purely open access work. A lot of them do deposits of manuscripts into the repository. And we also have a research data team, which does a lot of advocacy and training of researchers in the university. And we have also a variety of other people working on different projects. So we have repository managers, we have outreach and engagement coordinators helping on things like Twitter and social media, research skills coordinator actually training librarians within the university as well. And we are quite heavy in PhDs, in fact. We've got a lot of people with a research background and a fair few number of people with a library background too. And we're quite international. So we've got a lot of people from the UK, but we've got a couple of Aussies, people from Germany, Brazil, Greece, America, Spain, Poland. So what are the systems that we use to support all of this? Well, very early on, and this is before my time in fact, a very basic system was set up, which was designed to, along the same lines of accepted for publication, is just a very simple website to upload a manuscript. And researchers could just fill in a very basic form. Not very much information, just a few tick boxes, basic information like that. But this was not connected to anything. So we do a lot of cutting and pasting, and this has just become back-breaking work for a lot of people. At the same time, we had a repository that looked like it came out of some sort of 1990s horror film. So it wasn't really fit for purpose, and it wasn't doing its job, so we had to do a lot of work. So what was the problem? Well, we have an open access website, which has a basic submission form. That was coupled to what we use Zendesk. It's a help desk solution. So that helps us respond to emails, manage responses. We had symplectic elements. That was used in the last ref to manage the submission for the ref, but that's not linked to anything at this point. Research data sets. Very early on, we created a basic form within Drupal, a Drupal website, just to get the ball rolling with research data sets. Theses weren't being collected systematically at all, and most of the collection was done basically by email. And we had an old DSpace repository, which again, nothing was linked up. So what do? We need some upgrades. So we embarked on a bit of work to upgrade DSpace. So we very quickly went through from DSpace 3 to 4, and then last year in May we went to 5, and we've quickly iterated up from 5.4, 5.5, 5.6. We'll probably take 5.7 very soon. The next question for us is, of course, do we go 6 or jump to 7 later on? And we rebranded it. So instead of being called DSpace at Cambridge, which was its very old name, we've now called it Apollo. And we've done a lot of work to integrate all these systems together. So publications and research data now go directly in through symplectic elements, I should say. And that is also linked to the repository as well. The repository is also doing DOI minting as well. And if you're submitting a data set to us through Elements, the submitter will automatically receive back a placeholder DOI for their work. So this was a big complaint from researchers, is that we were taking so long to give them DOIs. So we would receive their data, and it might be 3 or 4 days, but they've got a tight publication deadline and they want to put the DOI for their data in somewhere. So now the system works automatically to give them a placeholder DOI that they can safely give to the journal and put in their paper. And we've also connected Zendesk through Zendesk is now connected into Apollo using a Java API. And we've built a custom form for managing deposit of theses, and that links both into the repository and into our help desk system. We've also done some ORCID integration. So if a user has an ORCID within Elements, that will go into the repository, and then through the DataSite connection, that will then feed into DataSite, and you can actually connect your ORCID profile to DataSite and get updates through your ORCID profile via DataSite. So in a way, we've kind of got ORCIDs moving as well, and publications moving. So the new website looks like this. So it's Apollo, and we've done a bit of work to, within the constraints of XML UI of DSpace, to give it a fresh new look and to reorganize the repository in terms of the different schools and other groups within the university. And a typical item page, well, maybe not a typical item page, but this is a page which has got a whole list of ORCIDs. We've also got alt metrics being displayed as well. And you can see there's also a padlock on the record. This would indicate, well, this should indicate to people that they probably can't get access, but in fact there is the request a copy mechanism which has been turned on. So we've had request a copy on since about May last year, and I'll talk a bit about what that's meant a little while later. So impact. I sometimes ask the research office what impact means, and they all just laugh at me. But anyway, repository stats. So since upgrading to 5, we've had about 1 million bitstream downloads. We've had over 3,000 item requests, so that's using the request a copy button. And we've also got over 1,000 ORCIDs now in the repository itself. And since 2015, as I've mentioned, we've added over 10,000 articles. We've also added a huge number of images. People come to us with all sorts of collections and data sets they want preserved in some way or stored in some way. So we usually try and help them out wherever possible. We also have added a large number of theses. A lot of these were digitized theses that we've bulk uploaded into the repository. As I've mentioned, 800 data sets, but also a lot of working papers. The economics school loves to submit working papers to us, so we've got a lot of working papers too. If you were at the poster presentation, some of you might have run into Cottage Lab's poster about Lantern. And I noticed that they put University of Cambridge on that, and that's probably because of what I've done here. So we went through Scopus and Web of Science last year and extracted a whole lot of DOIs that we could feed through into Lantern. So we got about 9,700 publications, almost 10,000 papers that we could say were affiliated with Cambridge in some way. We ran these through Lantern. And we can see that for the first time, I think, we've actually got over half of the university's output is in an open access source of some kind. I'm not going to claim that the actual full text is accessible or available, but at least we expect that the full text will become available at some point in the future. And about 26% of that is in the university's repository. Some of that occurs in other repositories, so that's mostly other UK repositories. We have lots of collaborators, so they're also depositing manuscripts in their repository. Europe PMC picks up a huge amount as well. Things that are in open access according to Web of Science and DOAJ journals. And Lantern also does some work to kind of scrape publisher websites to try and determine whether things are open access. So there's a small amount there which can be determined to be open access on the publisher's website. But what does this all mean? So if we just do a little bit of a citation analysis of the papers that have been published, the things that are not open access, you can see here that they get this looks like a pretty normal distribution. A lot of things have 0 citations, and then it tails off from there. if we look at the things that are actually open access, they get more citations. And this is only a snapshot taken, less than a year after some of these things will have been published. The really key thing is that open access things are less likely to not be cited, if that makes sense. However, and forgive me for putting up a thing about a journal impact factor, but I think in some way authors are kind of self-selecting their best manuscripts to submit to the repository. Think of some authors, they'll be publishing 70, 80 papers a year. In terms of a research excellence framework, and a research framework, they're not going to be wanting to submit everything. Or at least that's the perception that they have. So they don't want to submit every single paper. So they'll probably cherry pick and submit the best papers that they have. So I think we need to find new strategies to get that content, because our goal is, of course, 100% of papers. And if authors are choosing what to deposit and what not to deposit, then that's going to fail. In terms of request a copy, we can do a little bit of a look at what's going on. So you remember that the HEFCE open access policy requires things to be deposited within 3 months of acceptance. So that means we often deposit things before publication. And in fact, if we look at when the requests come, and this is about 3,000 requests, if we look at that, about 20% of all article requests that we get occur before publication. And this is a really key point, and this is what I think this is key evidence about the deposit on acceptance policy. Journals can take forever sometimes to make publications available, and I think this is good evidence for what the HEFCE policy was set out to achieve, is to achieve speeding up scholarly communication. So where is the future from here? Well, a few technical things. We're doing some upgrades with our symplectic elements instance, so we'll be moving to Repository Tools 2, fingers crossed, very soon. But we'll also be making the upgrade from DSpace to DSpace 6 and or 7. The really big shake-up in the UK is going to be the merging of HEFCE and research councils and into a new body called the UK Research and Innovation. That body is due to be formed on the 1st of April next year, and we're hopeful that in the future there'll be a better alignment of open access policies, because at the moment it's so complicated. It'd be better if we had just one policy, and that'd be great. And the elephant in the room, Brexit. Just a few thoughts now. So you've seen that we've spent, Cambridge itself has spent £7 million over the last 3 or 4 years. And about 75% of that, we figure, is going towards hybrid journals. As a whole, in 2015, the UK spent about 2.2 million from research councils and almost 6.6 from the Charities Open Access Fund. And to a certain extent, some researchers are equating open access with gold. That can be a problem. So I think what we really need is a bit of cultural change from researchers. That'd be great. But also policy changes from the funders. I think it is no longer sustainable for us to be paying for hybrid journals, because we really haven't seen the switch and the flipping of journals that was expected to occur. About the only really positive outcome of this whole trial process, if you will, has been the development of the Springer Compact, which is probably one of the most positive aspects. So I just want to acknowledge a few people. So the Office of Scholarly Communication, it's quite big. We've had quite a few people come and go as well over the years. And a couple of our friends, Jürgen and Owen from the Research Information Office, who manage the Symplectic Elements program. And I just want to say a few things about their funding. So myself and my colleague Peter were funded to come here from a joint Arcadia JISC money. And finally, thank you.
Thank you, Arthur. We've got a few minutes for questions. So hands up and I'll come round with the mic.
Arthur, have you costed the administrative, how much it costs to actually manage all those invoices for paying APCs?
To a certain extent, yes. So we have looked at like the staff costs, and that's a big thing for us, is to report back to the university in a way how much it actually costs to manage this, because we now have a huge team. I think the total cost of running the office, in terms of staff, is something like £200,000 a year. Off the top of my head, I think that sounds about right. I know that like dealing with invoices and stuff, I think we looked at it, it's like £40 per invoice for us to actually, that's the actual cost of processing that, not just within the library, but then once it goes into the finance services and actually makes its way around through there. So there are lots of costs involved in this. I can't be more specific than that, though.
Thank you. Thanks, Ellen. I'm just interested, absolutely fascinating. I'm watching the tweets, and people are absolutely staggered. Although we may have read some of this, already, but there's nothing like seeing a presentation to bring it home. Really interested in the way you're building the workflows to that aspect for obvious reasons. Just interested in terms of Cambridge and other repositories, other data repositories. Is there any communication there? I mean, I don't know exactly what your architecture is across the university as a whole. In terms of your model and perhaps using that elsewhere in the university?
Yeah, so we don't really connect out to other repositories. We do receive some feeds in from, say, Biomed Central or Hindawi, receive stuff like that, but we're not, the repository itself is not connected to feed out information other than the normal OAI feeds or RSS feeds.
What I mean is, are researchers at Cambridge depositing in other internal repositories within the university?
There are some repositories within the university, so different departments have got long-standing, some of them have got ePrints repositories and others have got other DSpace repositories. So there are some, but we really try and encourage them that things could just come to us first and then maybe flow on elsewhere. Yeah.
Right, thanks very much.
Okay. Thank you.